Hi, it's Mo. A few weeks ago, we had an unexpected turn of events. We found a baby squirrel who was missing from his mother and missing from his nest. He seemed a little bit lost, and we looked around for a nest. We couldn't find one, and since he was in the middle of the sidewalk in a dangerous area where there are a lot of dogs and bikes and passerbys who could accidentally harm him, we ended up taking him home. He was too young to eat anything too solid. We gave him a little bit of different things, but we knew that he needed like some liquid food. We went out and we got him kitten formula, and we ended up having to feed him like every 3 hours over the night so that we could see if he would kind of regain his energy, see if he would kind of be okay to be on his own, or if we needed to call animal control. So while I was up super early one morning feeding this baby squirrel kitten formula through a little bottle, I decided it would be a good time to also do part of a try-a chapter because over the night the squirrel baby got a little bit cold, and when I got him in the morning, he was a little bit lethargic. Although we packed the box that we put him in with some warm cloths, it wasn't enough. So I decided that he probably needed a little time around a warm body. He was eating a little bit, but he wasn't taking to the bottle the way we hoped he would. So I did attempt to feed him that morning. I also decided to read the first chapter of 4 contemporary works. So we have The Honeymooners by Christina Lauren. This is a dual author team who writes romances. I've never read a Christina Lawrence, but I found this one in a little free library and I'm interested to try it. We have Mr. Parumba's 24-Hour Bookstore by Robin Sloan. This is a light fantasy, maybe cozy fantasy book about a 24-hour bookstore. We have Neon and Daylight by Hermione Hobie. This is a debut novel about a young Londoner who comes to Brooklyn. And then we have another Brooklyn book, which is by Emma Straub. It's called Modern Lovers, and this takes place in Brooklyn. Emma Straub is a Brooklynite. I've actually served her in some of the cafes that I've worked at, and she owns a bookstore as well as writing books. The bookstore is called Books Are Magic. It's in Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn. While I was feeding the squirrel and while I was sitting with him, I was able to read a few of the first chapters. I read the first chapter of Mr. Parumba's 24-Hour Bookstore, and I really enjoyed this. I wasn't sure about this. I've heard a lot of mixed things, but it kind of gets you right away. The first chapter is only 10 pages. It's titled Help Wanted, and it starts with our main character, Clay. He's kind of aimless, he needs a job, he's wandering around, and I think this takes place maybe in like San Francisco. He went there to kind of join a startup and it fell through, so now he's looking for a job. As he's looking for a job, to make sure that he's not slacking off on that, he ends up going for walks around town, and during one of his walks he sees a Help Wanted sign, and he goes on a very strange interview in the first chapter of this book. So I did really like it. It seemed really quick. It's easy to read, lots of dialogue, short chapters. I read the first chapter of Neon in Daylight. This one was 15 pages long, and this one was a little bit harder to get through. It is about a young woman from London or from England who it seems like is maybe a little sheltered, a little taken care of by people, and when someone she knows tells her that she really couldn't possibly travel to Brooklyn on her own, she decides that's precisely what she's going to do. The first chapter kind of follows her as she's making this decision. It kind of goes back and forth between that and her currently being in Brooklyn and her very first impressions on the very first moment that she's in town. Our main character definitely seems like she might be neurodivergent or have some sort of different thought process than the average person, and she seems to struggle with like bright lights and big noises, so maybe Brooklyn isn't going to be the best place for her. This one didn't work quite as well for me. I did think it was interesting, but it felt a little obvious, or maybe that's not it. It felt like some of the themes were maybe too forced upon you, and maybe that's just the first chapter, maybe that's the intention of the book. I did enjoy, well, I don't know if I enjoyed it. I don't think I enjoyed it, but I am slightly intrigued to find out what happens with our main character and if she takes to Brooklyn or not. In the first chapter of Modern Lovers, we're meeting our main characters who are all in their like 30s and 40s. They are not young, hip Brooklyn people anymore, and that's kind of talked about in the first chapter. The first chapter is only 9 pages long. The first chapter starts in June when Elizabeth is going to her friend Zoe. They're good friends, so good in fact that once they used to be roommates and now they live in houses just a block away from each other in a small area of Brooklyn. So it's book club. Zoe and Elizabeth and their other female friends get together and hang out and have some food and talk about the books. In the first chapter we find out a little bit about Elizabeth and Zoe's relationship. We find out a little bit of their relationship to Brooklyn. I definitely would want to keep reading this one for the Brooklyn aspect alone. Obviously, I lived in Brooklyn, and the area that this is set in, I know a little bit about and I really enjoyed, and I watched a lot of change go on there while I was in Brooklyn. So I'm definitely interested in hearing more about the Brooklyn descriptions alone. But also I thought it was interesting that these are older characters, closer to my own age, still younger than me, but closer to the age that I was the last time I was living in Brooklyn. So I think that could be an interesting thing to read about. I don't love that it has deckled edges. I do love that it has French flaps. Neon in Daylight has French flaps too. So the last book that I have to read a chapter from is The Unhoneymooners. The first chapter of The Unhoneymooners is 15 pages long. So when I have read the first chapter, I will come back and let you know what I think. So I did go away and I did read most of the first chapter of The Unhoneymooners. This book is 395 pages long, and I read, like I said, about half of the first chapter, and they're following two sisters who are twins who are of Latinx descent, and one of them is getting married, and you learn that that one who's getting married is extremely lucky. She wins things, she gets things that she wants, and she's paid for her entire wedding basically by like winning things or getting free services. And then her other sister, which is the main character in this book, is not lucky at all. She's extremely unlucky. She doesn't like attention where her twin loves attention, and she's super happy for her sister, super happy that she's getting all this attention on her wedding, but she's also happy that it's not her getting the attention. So that's where I got in the first part, and the chapter was broken up into little pieces, which is why I kind of felt comfortable stopping there. Just on those initial pages, I feel like the setup is already like too long. I just don't care that much. I don't care about the people getting involved. I don't, like, they didn't set up any love interest like immediately, which you don't have to do that immediately, but even in the first chapter, you know, it wasn't grabbing me, I guess is what you want to say. I love the cover of this book though. I think it's really pretty. I do think it's a little odd that Christina Lauren is a writing duo, and I don't think either of them are Latinx. Their names are Christina Hobbs and Lauren Billings. Now that doesn't mean that one of them couldn't have married into that name, but I don't know, I thought it was weird to write from a Latinx perspective when you were not own voices. I think that I could find a free audio of this, so I might try out the audio. I think I've actually tried out the audio of this one before, very, very briefly, and I think I initially didn't like it because it was dual narrators. Looking through, I'm not sure if it's told in dual perspective or kind of omnipotent perspective, some from his point of view and some from her point of view. And I think the gist of this one is that the lucky sister, some bad luck befalls her and she can't go on her honeymoon, and so her sister, the unlucky one, our main character, has to go. She ends up going with the best man, and they don't like each other, but they end up falling in love, etc., etc. It just didn't seem that interesting to me. There's other romances that I think I'm more interested in than I have on my shelves, and definitely I have a lot of books to read in the near future. So I might try this one on audio, but if I don't like it, I will definitely give this one up. I don't think I will be keeping the Unhoneymooners. Modern Lovers, I didn't think I was going to enjoy, but because of the Brooklyn reference and because of the older main characters, I'm definitely going to hold on to, and I would like to try to maybe get to this one soon, and if I find it to be too domestic or not quite my style to women's fiction, then I will pass it along. Neon and Daylight wasn't exactly my style. It was very clunky, and it seemed a little like it could be a very obvious book, like it could be a book that hits you over the head with what it's trying to say. But again, because of the Brooklyn references and semi-intriguing idea of this, a Londoner coming to Brooklyn, I will try to read this one, and again, if I can get through it, then I will. If not, I will pass it along. And lastly, Mr. Parumba's 24-Hour Bookstore, I will definitely read. This one is like semi-sci-fi fantasy. I think there's some interesting intrigue going on with this bookstore and what's going on with it, so I will definitely be getting to this one. I love the colors of all these books, the yellows and blues. That was another try a chapter. So just to recap you on what happened with the squirrel, after you saw me feeding that squirrel, we held on to him for a couple more hours, but he wasn't really perking up as much as we would hoped. He wasn't eating as much or taking to the nipple in the way that we hoped, so we did end up calling the SPCA, which is like the local animal rescue. They also do animal control in Asbury Park, which sounds scary, but they're actually really nice. We've dealt with them before. It is a scary process because you have to call the police, the non-emergency police line, and they're always really like mean on the phone. The dispatchers are, I'm sure they're wonderful people, but they're always extremely curt and like serious when they talk to you, and they make you feel bad. So we had them call the SPCA, and they came out right away. And initially they were annoyed at us because we had taken the squirrel away from the area where we found it, but once we explained to them like what the circumstances are, they were like, oh, you did the right thing. And we had explained that we were feeding the squirrel, and she was like, yeah, that's great. I do think that the animal control and SPCA worry that people are like taking squirrels out of their nests or helping squirrels that don't really need help, because sometimes a mama squirrel will carry her babies somewhere, or sometimes, you know, she will leave a squirrel behind and then come back and get them later. But we had looked around, there was no nests, there was no mama, and the squirrel was acting strangely, like not rabies strangely, but like definitely odd. So we wanted to take it home. We wanted to try and give it some food, keep it warm. It was a super hot day that we found it, but it was going to get cold that night, so we wanted to make sure that he wasn't overheated and then underheated. Once we explained all this to the SPCA, they were a little bit more like, oh, you did the right thing. And the agent did say she could see that the squirrel was lethargic, and that the squirrel should definitely have more energy, and that he was not acting the way a squirrel his age would normally act. The agent was really nice. She said that her manager was a squirrel rehabber, so the squirrel was going to go and get the best attention it could and the best chance at surviving that it could. So we were happy for that. We were sad that we couldn't keep and take care of a squirrel, but that's not really our job. So we were happy that we got to help, and we were happy that he was going somewhere to be safe. That's the end of our 2023 squirrel rescue. I hope. You never know what's going to happen. And let me know if you've read any of the books that I read here. Let me know if you've ever rescued an animal and how that went for you. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!